From the Cyber Hub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the Cyber Hub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Well, folks, we're live. We're on. Roger Grimes.
Hello.
The man. But author of, what is it, 17 books now, Roger?
12, but I just signed my 13th one just yesterday. So doing another one.
Congratulations. What's the new book about?
But you won't believe this topic, ransomware. And when Wiley said, hey, we write a book on ransomware, I was like, I think I should have wrote that book a year ago. They're like, well, we really want a book, and can you write it in 2 months? I'm like, oh, okay. So that's what I'm doing. Gonna try to knock one out pretty quickly.
Well, that's awesome. Folks, if you're joining us live, it's our Friday special edition here on the Cyber Hub podcast. Roger Grimes, he's the legend, the man, 12 books, writing the 13th, the authority when it comes to a lot of things around cybersecurity, and really just a general, I like to call him in Yiddish, we call people like Roger a mensch, and that's just good peoples.
That's the first time I've ever been called that, but I'll take it. I love it.
Eddie says, hello, gentlemen. Hello, Eddie. Thank you for tuning in. All of you guys, this is an open discussion, Roger and I here. We're here to answer questions, talk to you guys today. We're live, Facebook, LinkedIn, Reddit, Twitch, and YouTube. So all your comments, I can't bring up Twitch or Reddit comments on the screen, but I do see you guys. You guys are on my other screen. So thumbs up to all of you guys there. We'll bring you up here as we get along. Roger, let's talk about data-driven defense a little bit, right? So buzzword, we're wrapping up RSA. RSA ended yesterday, right? Typically, you and I right now would be at an airport in San Francisco flying home, but we're not. We're at the comfort of our own homes, having a virtual conversation with our hundreds of friends on the interweb. And so you and I did a podcast almost...
Ready to go. Can't wait for that to disappear out of my life.
You know, I will say one thing, though. This morning, I had to go run some errands, and I went into Target right down the street. No one had a mask on, not even Target employees. It was brilliant.
Cool.
I was like, huh? They're like, if you want to wear a mask, you can, but you don't have to wear a mask, and no one had a mask on.
And the next thing you know, people were taking their shirts off and...
Yeah, no shoes, no shirt, lots of service at this point. We're just happy to see your nipples today. But Roger, you and I did a podcast about a year ago on data-driven defense. And data-driven defense to me is essentially the idea of, it's not the idea. The concept of it is you're basing your security decisions based on data that's coming from all kinds of different data points from within the business and beyond. One of the very interesting things to me is, it seems to me like visibility is essentially data-driven defense, is it not?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems like that's the new buzzword.
Yeah, you know, and really, I consider, out of the 13 books now, I consider data-driven defense the most important book. It's my magnum opus. Nothing means as much. It's truly the one that I care about the most. And it really, if you understand the concepts, it will change the way you look at computer security in general, and be better for your life. But it is, the really simple idea is you should defend against, first and best, against the things that are most likely to hurt you. And it's a very simple, dumb thing to say, but it turns out 99% of organizations do not do that. And our entire cybersecurity infrastructure is made to distract us and to make us not do that. So what I mean by that is there's 2 or 3 things in the cybersecurity world that account for almost all the attacks. 2 or 3 things. There's lots of different ways you can be attacked. There's 18,000 different vulnerabilities last year, all these different ways. But really, if you look at the root cause exploits, there are things like social engineering, unpatched software, password guessing, eavesdropping, man-in-the-middle attacks, physical attacks. You know, so there's these 10 root causes. But 2 of them, social engineering and unpatched software, and maybe if you throw in the password guessing or weak passwords or authentication attacks, they account for like 90 to 99% of all successful attacks. Just a couple of things. Social engineering is the #1 cause for malicious data breaches on every single survey you can read. And let me say, this is no surprise, because unpatched software and social engineering have been the number one, number two reasons why companies have been compromised, as the majority of the reasons, for the entirety of my 34-year career. There have been some little things that popped in there, like DOS boot viruses and things like that, or USB key viruses, a configure. But if you look at how companies are compromised, it's social engineering, unpatched software, and again, maybe throw in some type of password attack or password guessing in there. But if you think about every control document that you've ever got, like the NIST cybersecurity framework, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, whatever, they're all 80 to 200 pages. They all have 100, like the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, just released their version 8 of their controls. And I actually think those controls are among the best. But it's hundreds of controls, of layered controls. And this NIST cybersecurity framework, 80 pages, whatever, HIPAA, 120, whatever it happens to be. And what they do is, if you have to be audited through a compliance audit, or you have to apply this document, they're like, go apply these 200 controls. And what they don't tell you is that 2 or 3 of those controls mean more than everything else. And they, in the NIST cybersecurity document, better patching and fighting social engineering maybe accounts for 3/4 of a page out of the 80 pages. And so the entire industry, everything that we're taught is, hey, you have to fight everything. You have to fight this. If you get an audit, they're going to want, an audit finding is an audit finding. Oh, high risk, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. When in fact, if they cybersecurity rank them, risk ranking, data-driven defense is about risk ranking, there would be 40 to 60 pages of stuff about fighting social engineering and unpatched software, and everything else just a couple of paragraphs. Instead, it's exactly the opposite, and it's that way in every single cybersecurity document. And I just saw the recent White House executive order, we're going to fix cybersecurity. Let me say, I like it. I like the document. I like most of what it says. But if it comes out, it is going to result in another control document that has 200 controls, with no one telling you 2 of these controls mean a whole lot more than all the rest added all together.
Well, because they're looking at because they're looking at kind of overview, and not really, they're not looking at data. I feel like a lot of these documents that get written are predominantly, here's 600 controls you have to put in. And it's wonderful to have all those 600 controls, but really maybe only 10 of them matter to you, and all the rest are nice to haves. I want to get to some comments we're getting on LinkedIn. So Matt Lee says, howdy, what did I walk into? Matt, you walked into data-driven defense with the legendary Roger Grimes. Christoph, howdy all. Howdy, Chris. How's it going, buddy? And you've got a bunch of other comments coming up. John De La Cruz, he is a legend. Hello, hi, everyone. John De La Cruz, thank you for your service. I believe he discharges. You get your DD-214, I think, in a month or so, right, buddy? So that's awesome. Chris talks about the human element. People and process vulnerabilities account for the majority of these flaws, based on what you were talking about just a moment ago. Chris and Danielle talk about the 80-20 rule, and Danielle jinxed it because they both wrote it simultaneously. But Danielle got the jinx in before Chris could. And finally, the impact per organization differs. Roger, when we look at data-driven defense, and for the folks on Twitch and Reddit, we're going to get right to you guys, I promise. Because I'm getting blown up on the other side here. But we'll get to that in just a moment, folks. Roger, when you look at kind of the concept of visibility, right? So that's the buzzword. That's the new buzzword for me, visibility. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from vendors in the last 2 weeks that talk about, you don't really know what to defend until you have real visibility. There are organizations out there that don't know half of their infrastructure, half of their data. Mm-hmm. Right? When you look at data-driven defense, if applying just the basic principle of data-driven defense, you really do just have visibility. That's literally the part of data-driven defense. Is that not the case?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like I tell people, like, suppose, I work for Noble4. We fight social engineering and phishing, right, which is really it's the reason why I left Microsoft and went to Noble4, because I got tired of all my clients being compromised after I put in $200 million super advanced defense systems and routers and firewalls and intelligent firewalls, next gen this and next gen that. I put in smart cards, I put in two-factor authentication, all this stuff, and they're being compromised because of social engineering and unpatched software. Literally, I began to realize I was concentrating on the right thing. But so those two things, unpatched software, social engineering, number one, number two ways for most of the 3 decades. But I tell people, don't listen to me because I could be lying to you. I have incentives to lie to you because I work for a company that tries to fight social engineering, and we want you to buy our products and services. What data-driven defense says is measure your own attacks. How are people trying to break into you? How are they successfully breaking into you? And I mean every threat. So every computer virus, everything that gets by every company typically is compromised by malware of some type. And you'll get this antivirus report that goes, here's the top 30 things we detected and removed. Well, if it detects it and removes it before it has a chance to touch the workstation, it's not really a threat, right? If the firewall blocks an attack, it's not really, well, I guess it's a threat and a risk, but it's not a big one. What I'm concerned in, what is the stuff making it past your defenses? So if the antivirus is actually cleaning it out of your temp folder off your desktop or something like that, which often occurs, what is underappreciated is how did that get in here? How did it end up in the temp folder under Windows C:temp? So every time you have a threat that gets by your existing defenses, you need to ask yourself, you need to put in mechanisms in place that account for, measure, turn into metrics of how things are breaking in successfully. So data-driven defense is learn how things are successfully breaking in past your current defenses, and then concentrate on closing those root holes. And if most organizations did that, they would find out that social engineering and unpatched software are the biggest threats. Maybe it could be some password attacks or something like that. And you do have stuff that jumps in there, like supply chain attacks, right? Have been very rigorous. But it's like when you get hit by ransomware, ransomware is not your problem. Ransomware is an outcome of your real problem. How did the ransomware get in? Or, it used to be 10 years ago, it was this pass the hash attacks. Oh my God, pass the hash attacks. We're going to fight pass the hash attacks. I'm like, no. We need to fight people of how they got in to get domain admin credentials. Same thing with ransomware. Ransomware, they exploited something to get into your environment and then took over your environment. And if you wiped away ransomware, if you made some magic rule and there's no such thing as ransomware, one day, 10, 20 years from now, maybe there's no ransomware in the world, there's still going to be a problem that bad guys are going to take advantage of. Your problem is not ransomware. Ransomware is the outcome of your real problem. And until you start focusing on the real problems, you're never going to stop ransomware. And when you focus on the real problems, you're going to stop ransomware and every single other type of attack that would use that same root cause exploit.
Ransomware is the outcome of your real problem. That is a beautifully said statement that will define this live stream. Ransomware is the outcome of your real problem. And if you let that sink in and you just go, wow, it's, even when people talk about Colonial, right? And they talk about the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack. I laugh because I've seen all these talking heads and I'm like, you guys haven't read anything, right? Colonial's, the only part of their system that was under ransomware attack wasn't their operational billing system. It wasn't their operational systems. It wasn't their OT. Their OT was just fine. It was their billing system. That's why they shut down a pipeline. They couldn't bill.
Yeah. And so that problem is that the whole industry tries to make you distributed and unfocused. So I can't, about 20 years ago, I started to realize, oh my God, every time everybody's compromised is unpatched software and social engineering. If the people are like, oh my God, they got my passwords, it's a password problem. How did they get your passwords, right? Or you'll see some surveys, they're like, okay, social engineering is 40%, unpatched software is 12%, ransomware is 30%. I'm like, okay, how did the ransomware get in? Because if you actually study it, it turns out social engineering, unpatched software, misconfiguration. Right. Something like that. But we literally, I would go to CSOs and CISOs and I go, hey, what are your top 10 or what's your top problems that you're trying to fight? What are your top problems? And every company that I went into, their top problems were social engineering and unpatched software as far as stuff being how they got compromised. And the CISOs would go, it's cloud security, It's, they would come up with these esoteric things that were kind of futuristic and strategic. And they would have like 80 projects. Like they'd have, like every company I went to had like 80 IT projects, and they're trying to accomplish 40 of them in a given year. Everybody involved's got 20 number ones. Like you can have 20 I would tell them, you can't do 20 things. Good. Go ask your boss to tell you which the true number one is. And they would come back excited because now they only had 3 or 4 number ones. And then those number ones would only last for a couple of weeks or months till the new number one problems came in. Right? Well, you got to do this. We're doing this project. We're doing that thing. But what was weird to me is out of the 80 projects, almost none of them said, hey, we have to fight social engineering better and we have to better patch. Like they had a patch management thing that was patching at 98% effectiveness, and they thought they had it handled. But if you ask them, how are they compromised? Social engineering, unpatched software.
So your old company, Microsoft, I think it was Proofpoint that launched a report this week that said that on the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, within 5 minutes of disclosure, there were already threat actors scanning for that vulnerability actively. 5 minutes. 5 minutes of disclosure with patch released. 5 minutes, there were already threat actors scanning. So when people say 98% patch management, like effective, like whatever, I'm like, how do you measure that? Like we had 100 patches to do. We did 98. We couldn't get to 2 because of the complexities. So, okay.
Yeah, or my favorite one was they'd say they have 99. Everybody I went to had 99% patching effectiveness. What didn't they patch? Adobe Acrobat and Java. I'm like, oh, you mean the ways that the bad guys are breaking in?
I want to get to comments here because we've got you're bringing a lot of them. I want to start off with this one though by Andrew. He said that is the best explanation. I'm glad I stopped by here on my lunch break today. That's awesome. Eddie Doyle, my co-host on the Tech Town Square, really great guy. I actually got to meet him for the first time in person last week. This time, we were having Cat's Deli in New York. Best pastrami sandwich in the country.
Best sandwiches in the world, downtown New York.
Yes, but he says cyber awareness training seems like it's not working. Why?
Well, I mean, do you mean it's not working and it's not perfect or something? I mean, if you email me at rogerg@noble4.com, I can send you a bunch of best practices, rogerg@noble4.com. But if you're just saying like it's not working because you still have some employees that can be tricked with it or whatever, what I say is it's really, security is not binary. It's not all or nothing. It's trying to be safe. Like even when you're teaching someone to drive, you're not hoping that you're not thinking that they're never going to get in an accident in their lifetime, or they're not going to lose, we all drive home and we get a couple of miles. We're like, wow, I just drove a couple of miles and I wasn't aware. So all cybersecurity is about risk management and decreasing risk. And if you use a cyber awareness training program appropriately, you are going to significantly reduce the risk of somebody being socially engineered. And since that's the number one way most companies are maliciously compromised, you're significantly reducing your risk. But if you're saying, well, because I have people go, it's not perfect. Some company last week just published some. If I add up, companies that did this and did that, they were still compromised or whatever. But the whole idea is, it would be like if perfection is the only way that you're going to do something, well, why patch, right? We should not patch then, because patching is rarely ever perfect. But what we're trying to do is significantly reduce the risk that somebody's going to use an unpatched piece of software to come in. Same thing with cybersecurity is you may not be able to be perfect, but we know for sure that our customers, if we do an initial baseline phishing test, the average customer is 38% phishable, meaning 38% of their employees will be tricked by a very generic looking phishing test. When you and I look at it, James, you go, nobody would be tricked by that. Nope, about 38%, probably like 32 to 45 is where it ran, but it averages about 38%. Then you give them just some basic security education, some simulated phishing tests to see how well that they're doing, and additional education people that failed the simulated test. And the average customer goes below 5% in less than a year. And it's a significant reduction of the most common attack. But don't let perfection be the enemy of doing nothing, because if the only thing I can think that is truly binary is the airplane engine working, or did the atomic bomb go off? Everything else is less binary. And patching, security awareness training, it's about reducing risk.
I love that. That's brilliant. So Chris answered Eddie, and he said, focus on the Technologists focus on technology are still lacking how to make it relatable to human and the business process. I would say that is probably the top 3 problem for all CISOs today, is they understand security or they understand governance, compliance, and risk. They don't know how to take what they understand, break it down, and explain it to someone in a way where it would resonate with them and they would win their support.
Yeah, or what I think it happens to CISOs is that us underlings don't communicate to the CISOs well. Like I remember it was 2005 or something when Cisco came out with it was 2014 report. Cisco said that unpatched Oracle Java was responsible for 91% of all successful web exploits. I was wondering, did any CISO know that? Did anyone ever communicate to them, hey, we could better patch one program and get rid of 91% of our risk? I mean, that's insane. And the problem is that most of us don't have an idea of what the risk amounts are for the different risks. And if we don't know them well, we can't communicate them up the chain so that the leaders can then give us the resources to put in the right places against the right things. I'm
going to stop you there.
Okay.
I've read your book. I've read Data-Driven Defense. It is my Torah for security. It is how I operate as a CISO.
Okay.
It's how I train my team to think.
I hear the but coming.
No buts. No ands or buts about it. It's when you talk about what you just brought up where CISOs don't know that. To me, if you're in the CISO chair, you're expected to know and ask questions that help you understand what you're buying or what you're dealing with. But you've got to know how to ask questions. That's like, saying CISOs don't know something because we're not telling them is the same as saying, a lawyer didn't know this because he didn't read the law. But that's his job.
Yeah, but I agree. But the problem is like the CISO is also being told, make sure you implement the cybersecurity framework. And compliance is not the same as security. We know that.
True.
And compliance is a checklist. And whether the CISO is going to be nailed for me, like if there's any audit exceptions, the CISO is going to be yelled at for, and they don't care what those exceptions are, even though they could have drastically different impacts on risk.
So I've been called crazy right now for relating your data-driven defense book to the Torah. I'm relating it in terms of the Torah is my moral compass in life.
No, he meant it was written in Hebrew. That's what he was meaning.
Yeah. I mean, the Torah is my moral compass in life. Data-driven defense became the compass to how I encompass everything within security, right? It's how I look at different frameworks, how I look at CIS controls, how I look at NIST, how I look at when I'm doing my SOC 2, when I'm going through different audits, when I'm doing my vendor risk management and documentation processes. I'm data-based 100% of the time. We don't go on feelings. We don't go on we think. There's no such thing as we think. The only thing we think of is we know someone's in our system right now and we don't know who that is. So what's the data we need in order to identify that anomaly?
And it's root cause analysis. But I liken it to our industry. It's been around for decades, but it's very innocent in that we don't use enough data. And like if you go to the insurance industry, it's all about data and probabilities. Or the ransom. Right now, cybersecurity insurance industry is imploding. There are vendors getting out, too much ransomware, ransom is being paid, all kinds of insurance industry people are exiting it. You are now going to have a hard time getting coverage greater than $100,000, and most people won't even be able to get that. And it is because they've run the probabilities. What's the probability of the money we take in versus what we have to put out? And in insurance, like they know what's the probability of a teenage driver that's going to have a crash versus an old dude, or what's the probability that you may be hit by lightning, or what's the probability if you have high cholesterol that you may have a heart attack. Like there's all kinds of data and probabilities, but in our industry, it just isn't widely shared. And when I tell people 2 or 3 things account for almost all your risk, it is really kind of they're like, yeah, they knew it, but they didn't know it. And then I go further. Okay, there isn't a survey on the planet that won't say that social engineering and unpatched software aren't the top 2 things to fight, and that they don't account for 90% of attacks. How much of your cybersecurity budget is related to those 2 things? On the average cybersecurity budget we look at, less than 5%. And I'm not saying that your budget needs to be 90%, but possibly more than 5% if you're trying to fight the number one, number two things. Part of the reason why we can't stop attackers and everything's so bad and we got to assume breach is because we're not really focusing using the data in the right areas to stop breach effectively.
So Danielle says she challenges you, Roger. You're getting a challenge from good old Danielle. You downgraded USB attacks, but what about the try to cry ransomware?
Yeah, so so overall, USB attacks right now aren't a very big thing, but they are in the ransomware world. I think they account for something like 8% of attacks. So this is one of those areas like with config or with USB attacks came in there. But if you think about, again, how did it get on the USB key? Like if I go back to the root cause, it was probably social engineering and unpatched software. I mean, it didn't just get there through atoms through the air. There is at some point somebody's workstation was compromised because of social engineering or unpatched software, and when they plugged in their USB key, that got infected, and that started the whole chain of events. So Danielle, you're right to call me out on it. I shouldn't downplay it. And in the ransomware class, like RDP password guessing is a lot more common in ransomware than just overall hackers and malwares. There are certainly different pockets for different types of things, but the statistic that I gave still holds true across the board and even to ransomware. And even like a year or two ago, RDP attacks, unpatched RDP or password guess attacks were number one in ransomware, according to some surveys. Well, that lasted for about a year, and now social engineering and unpatched software is number one, number two. USB keys were up to 8%. I think it's down to 2% now or something like that, but it changes and ebbs and flows. And the whole trick is you need to get data, right? So if you see a trend, like when Configure came out, I had a friend that told me about these USB key attacks when I was writing my first book in 2000. And I said, I've never seen it. That's crazy. But then I started to see the trend of more and more USB attacks coming. As soon as you see an upward trend in your environment, boom, get on it, right? Because that upward trend is going to continue. Like ransomware, we have all this thing until we finally effectively mitigate it and put it down.
So I saw a very creative USB attack that happened early on during COVID. So when people were all home, someone was able to manage to get some PII and home addresses of several critical employees and put USB sticks filled with ransomware and mailed them to the employee's home, saying this is from, on behalf of the company and the CEO, saying download all the packets that are on here on your device and use them for the day-to-day and so forth.
Yeah, and let me say, so you always do have these outliers, or let's say supply chain attacks. If you follow data-driven defense to the T, you would have not been prepared for the SolarWinds supply chain attack. You downloaded SolarWinds, it had a backdoor, you didn't know about it. Well, those things are going to occur, but what my pushback is, you don't know what's going to hit you. You don't know when the USB key is going to show up there. The only thing you can do is play the odds. And if you're trying to, you're going to do everything, and nobody can do everything perfectly. So you have to decide, what am I going to concentrate on? And if social engineering is 40% or 80% of your successful attacks, are you going to then focus on stopping USB attacks or supply chain attacks, even though they can still occur? Like the Army, when an Army has to go in and fight somebody, there's lots of ways the adversary can fight, but they're trying to concentrate of how to appropriately distribute the resources based upon the most likely threats they're going to face. The problem in our industry is that everybody sees all these threats like bubbles in a glass of champagne. That's what I use. And they don't realize that 2 or 3 of these bubbles are so significantly bigger than all the others. And so they end up like, one of my pet peeves is, I hear people talking about like, we got to make sure we get storage encryption. Storage encryption ain't saved a whole lot ever. Even transmission security, like, good TLS and stuff like that, it really doesn't stop that many attacks. If you look at how, I've yet to talk to a person, my company went down. I'm like, how did they go down? TLS, we're using TLS version 1.1, took us down.
I love it. Let's get to a little bit more comments here. Matt Lee says, amen. Reducing risk is the only way to think about it. Lowering the impact of any SLE to ARO. Pierre says, education and training needs to be a big focus. I completely agree with that. Yep, compliance any security. Yep.
Not equal.
Not equal to security.
Not equal to
Sorry.
security.
Yeah. Yep. It's Friday. Compliance is the Chris says, compliance is the overarching process. The details are based on logs, analysis, and implementation of security to ensure you meet compliance in the end.
Yeah, but I say make sure you risk analyze your compliance checklist. So you're going to get 200 controls for compliance. Figure out which of those controls need to be handled first and best as you go along the checklist.
I love that. That's awesome. Chris says, many don't know how to measure the impact of social engineering training on culture change. What are your thoughts on that one, Roger?
Well, again, use data, right? So, I mean, that's part of it. Changing culture is tough. It's a whole lot of things. We have a whole division of our company. It's about changing corporate culture.
Kai.
But ultimately,
I've got Kai on Tech Corner later today. That goes live in 2 hours.
Yeah, that's what I love is that he was thinking about culture 15 years ago before anybody else was, right. I think. But, you still have to put metrics around. If you want to manage something, you have to put metrics around it. And, you can send and measure and do simulated phishing attacks to see if the culture is working to help protect your company. So you try as best you can to put some metrics around something. You can't always measure. There's qualitative versus quantitative, but it's good to be able to try to put some data around it, or you can't measure it or manage it.
Yeah, compliance. Matt says compliance keeps the money coming in the front door. Security keeps it from falling out the back.
Actually, I like that. I like that, Matt. That's a good one. I may steal that for another talk.
Someone says you talk like an accountant. Edgar on YouTube.
I used to be a CPA, certified public accountant. That's what I was straight out of college. Turned out I was the worst accountant you ever met.
Chris says not all hackers are criminals. Agreed.
I agreed. I'm a hacker. Hacker.
And then threat actor is my preferred term instead of hacker for threat actors, for the evil ones, the evil side.
I say malicious hacker the most. In every book I've ever written, I have a little blurb at the front going, yes, I know I'm calling these people hackers, and not all hackers are evil. In fact, most hackers are good people. But if I use hacker and I forget to put malicious on it, just know that you can read the whole sentence to get my intent. But I love hackers. I'm a hacker. All my best friends are hackers. I don't do anything illegal or unethical. Well, except for speed.
So Matt has given us the ability to use the compliance keeps the money coming in the front door. Security keeps it falling from the back.
Let's trademark it.
Let's trademark it right now. Sorry, Matt. We'll throw you a few bones on the way. I think the biggest. I think one of the. I think one of the things about. Hackers or the conversation between, like hackers or threat actors or cyber criminals. And we see that the industry still hasn't found the perfect term, right? Some industry publications will not use they'll use hackers to describe cyber criminals. Others will use cyber criminals and some will use threat actors. It's really crazy. He goes, that blurb must be for Chris Roberts. Hackers are awesome. Chris has been working hard on changing that. Chris says you just slipped up, Roger. So I didn't catch it. So Chris did. So Chris is a far more.
Get in line for the first 20 years of guys yelling at me for saying the word hacker.
All right. So, Roger, we're almost out of time today. We still have a little bit. We got about 5 more minutes here, and I kind of want to take this into a perfect kind of ending for our live cast today, which is when we look at how data is brought together overall. In the book, you talk often about just gathering a lot of different data points and being able to kind of look at them from a risk perspective slightly. And the concept of visibility today, because, people have, I'm sorry, I'm going to say it for the 3rd time on today's live cast, but visibility to me is now a buzzword. You don't know what's out there. And I'm like, well, every piece of data out there, every piece of information, every app produces some level of data. So if you're just bringing in all the data, if you're just sucking in the data, you're going to be able to know what's out there. Essentially, if you're doing data-driven defense, you know what's out there as a general rule of thumb. And you brought up ransomware, and we've done a lot of different things on the show today. But you talked a little bit about hacking MFA. And I want to give you an opportunity as we talk about kind of like data-driven defense, to kind of give people a little preview into what is it to, hack MFA. Because we're going to do a webinar later, I think in June, on hacking MFA together. But talk a little bit about MFA, because a lot of people, they think that I'm multi-factor and I'm straight. And let's take this whatever minutes we have left on the live cast and kind of give people a little bit more of a, let's take that security blanket off a little bit and get them thinking,
Okay.
get the juices going.
So, multi-factor authentication, where you use 2 or more factors to log on in. Good thing. I wrote a free ebook on it. I've got a webinar, my most successful webinar I've done in my career. I've taught about it at Black Hat and RSA, and I wrote a book for Wiley called Hacking Multi-Factor Authentication. The key part of it is that MFA is a good thing. Use it where you can to protect data that needs that type of protection. With that said, MFA doesn't work on 2% of the world's websites and services. And where it does work, it only protects certain types of authentication attacks. Like, if you don't have a password because you use MFA that doesn't have a password involved with it, you cannot be phished out of having a password. But I can still send you a phishing email that starts a man-in-the-middle evil proxy attack that will bypass 90% of MFA solutions. And there's ways to stop it, but most of them don't do it. So what I say is that I can hack any MFA solution at least 3 different ways. I can hack most of them over 10 different ways. You take your most secure, oh my God, the most secure MFA, I can hack it many different ways. Doesn't mean you still shouldn't use it. But when I talk to end users and admins, they think that when they're using MFA, that suddenly they're many times less likely to be hacked. And as a matter of fact, even the government, the White House executive order and all this, use MFA. Everybody's like, use MFA. You got to use MFA. When we all convert 100% to MFA, it is still going to be 80% of the threat actors out there being successful. MFA is a good thing. It stops many types of attacks. It is not going to stop all the threat actors. And it hasn't. Right. How do I know? Because there have been companies and services using MFA for over 20 years, and they are hacked to death. So, just to finish it up, what I try to tell people is if you're using MFA, learn about the types of attacks that could be successful against it and educate yourself and your end users that use it about the types of attacks that could be successful against it, so that they're just like we teach them with passwords. Don't hand out your passwords. We're never going to call you and ask you for your password. We're never going to send you an email and ask you for your password. You just have to educate people about the different types of attacks that could be successful, even though they're using the MFA, so that they're aware of it.
Yeah. I reported on a ransomware group last week on Android. So it was a new type of malware that only works on Android, and it's designed to get into your phone and target your MFA apps and screen record everything coming into your phone so that they can get access to your MFA apps. So when people always talk about MFA, and we're going to do a webinar on it, and this by no means is saying turn off your MFA because it doesn't work. It just means that layered defense model, which is what Chris talks about, or defense in depth, is really, really critical. Matt also says session token theft, evil enterprise apps, MFA doesn't help.
Some MFA can stop those types of attacks, like FIDO2 implementations can. Anytime where you register the device in the website, they stop that sort of attack. But I can hack them a bunch of different ways. So it's all about being aware about what the risks are.
Right. The over-the-air authentication, right? Kind of the I call it the Microsoft and G Suite almost, way of authenticating you is when you're trying to log in and you're logging in from an unknown device, they'll send you a message and say, authenticate on your device, on your phone. And if you can't do that, if you don't do that, then that session really does fail. That's fairly successful as MFA, but that's not really achievable in a scalability model, because that becomes very inconvenient, especially if, let's say, you're on an airplane with airplane Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And what's nice, both Gmail and Microsoft will allow you to print these permanent vacation codes that never expire, and they're always printed with your email address. So if you ever lose that list, those codes never expire. And it's got your email address. So, cool.
Lovely. Matt says, yay for FIDO, supporting it. He goes, I just bought it for 200 of my employees. So
one of the better solutions out there, and the reason why I love FIDO too, and it's a standard, not a vendor, is that they actually are the only MFA consortium that threat models their solution, tells you how how they stop the threats and which threats are still left behind and how you can even resolve those. Nobody else does that. I think every MFA vendor should threat model a solution and release those results to the public. I kudos to them for it.
Yeah, I think more transparency is definitely something we need in our industry. It's definitely something we absolutely need. So for everyone watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, LinkedIn, very active, Reddit also very active, and I couldn't get to those guys, and I apologize to the folks over on Reddit. I'm so sorry. Begging your forgiveness. Maybe let me take one. Can we take one question out of Reddit? Do you have a few more minutes?
I do.
One very good question from Reddit. This is coming from Reddit user, hacker is life, with a bunch of numbers. We're not going to put you on blast, but he asks about something you brought up a little bit earlier when you talked about essentially ransomware is ransomware is the outcome of your real problems. He goes, isn't that what red teamers do? We try to outline these problems. What do you think is the failure between red teamers to getting the message across to the business?
So you ready for this? I love red teams. I've been part of red teams. My problem with red teams is every red team I know is going to be highly successful against what they're doing, but it doesn't necessarily mimic the real world attacks. Like most red teams come up with really phenomenal attacks, but how that person that's being red teamed would actually be broken in by real life hackers, most of the time there's a big disconnect. So my data-driven defense is about making sure if people red team you, they should red team you in ways that mimic the real life attacks against you. Because a lot of red teams, they have super uber hackers like, oh, I did this thing and I did this thing and they got me here and got me to the crown jewels. I'm like, does that mimic any way that's actually been tried against your organization ever? Like, no. I'm like, well, okay, it's valuable, but not as valuable as seeing if the company is more resistant to the things that are more likely to occur to them in the real world.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. Folks, for everyone watching us, thank you so much for tuning in and spending a few minutes with us on this lovely Friday, May 21st. Sorry, it's May 21st today. It's May 21st. Yeah, that's awesome. So thank you for everyone, for Chris, Matt, Eddie, Danielle, Edgar, Chris, the other Chris, and Pierre, and everyone who commented here. I want to say, Andrew, thank you for all of you guys for joining us, John, and everyone else, and on Reddit, for all of you guys, awesome community over on Reddit. Thank you so much. Sorry, it's once I start bringing comments on the screen, I lose track of the other side of my screen completely. StreamYard's going to have to get a little bit more interactive with streaming on Reddit. Same thing with Twitch. Sorry, guys. I do apologize. We'll get you guys next time. I'm going to be doing a webinar with Roger. We're going to be showing how we hack MFA. So you'll see that webinar get posted next week. Go register for it. It's going to be awesome. You don't want to miss it. We're going to be showing live videos of how you hack MFA. So you're going to want to tune into that. It's one of Roger's most successful talks at RSA, and he's going to be bringing it directly to all of us here and sharing some of that wisdom with all of us. So make sure you have that. We're getting a few final comments here. So Niana says, thank you, very informative. Love the discussion. Thank you so much for spending time with us, and I'm glad you found it helpful. And Teresa says you have to think about the motivation of real life bad actors. If they want in, they will. Also, a few of the last comments here from Reddit around the final question that you answered. Apparently hackers turn people on, so that's a good thing. But they talk about red teams need to be coordinating and actually with the threat intel teams to see what's being used out there before they do the red teaming. If red teams are talking to threat intel, then there's a disconnect with what they're doing and what they're seeing, and it's just a fake illusion. It's essentially an oasis.
Yeah, that is it. The more you can correlate, I mean, to get the best value.
Right, to get the best value. That's it. Yeah, absolutely. Folks, that's it for us here today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe. 9 a.m. on Monday, I'll be back with the practitioner brief. Later today, Kai runs a Know Before Security Culture, an unbelievable podcast on security culture. You guys can go check it out on the CyberHub podcast channel and on YouTube. So go check it out. We've got a bunch of RSA content as well, all bite-sized, 20-minute long interviews, folks, for RSA. Go check them out as well, with some great people and great companies there. So also go check that out. Thank you to Roger. Again, thank you to Know Before for all of their support and just giving up a lot of knowledge. And we'll end with one final comment from Chris Joseph. Always great in real life live stream. Thank you. Yeah, I love these. All right. That's awesome. All right, folks. That's it for us here. We'll sign off. Have a great weekend, guys. Stay safe. Go enjoy the beautiful weather. And most importantly, if you get a phishing test this email, remember what Roger said early on. Don't click it. Cheers, guys.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.